Karoline Leavitt hits back. Newsom turned California into a refuge for chaos. What happens when a freshman firebrand walks into a decades-old debate with a flash drive and walks out with the national spotlight? Karoline Leavitt wasn't supposed to be the face of immigration reform. But when she stood before the press with a quiet confidence and a folder of leaked documents, everything changed. The emails were real, the signatures matched, and the contents explosive. Internal communications between nonprofit contractors and local California officials appeared to show deliberate efforts to avoid cooperation with federal deportation orders, possibly even instructions on how to dodge ICE presence during scheduled sweeps. In a single press conference, Karoline flipped the script. What Gavin Newsom had framed as compassionate sanctuary was now under fire as state-enabled obstruction. And while the governor's office dismissed the leaks as misleadingly selective, Karoline challenged the public to read them for themselves, then make up their minds. Cable news exploded. TikTok clips went viral. News anchors asked, was this a breach of trust, a bureaucratic misunderstanding, or the tip of something bigger? And quietly across living rooms in Arizona, Florida, Pennsylvania, and even parts of California, something shifted. This wasn't just about policy anymore. This was about who gets to decide what justice really looks like. It started with a chair, a podium, and a file. Karoline Leavitt stood alone in a small press room on Capitol Hill. There were no handlers behind her, no major network banners. Just a clean white folder stamped with a single word, confidential. Today, she said calmly, we're going to talk about what's really happening behind the term sanctuary state. And we're going to do it with receipts. Inside the folder was a series of leaked emails and internal memos from several California-based nonprofits contracted to manage migrant services. The language was dry, bureaucratic until it wasn't. Inside the folder was a series of leaked emails and internal memos from several California-based nonprofits contracted to manage migrant services. The language was dry, bureaucratic until it wasn't. One memo dated just 4 months ago outlined coordination between a nonprofit shelter and city officials in San Diego. The subject line read, Avoiding Detainment Patterns, ICE Sweep Anticipation Protocol. The attached checklist included steps for moving undocumented individuals to alternate shelters during ICE operations. One bullet point read, Coordinate with van teams to reroute housing assignments on Thursday evenings, avoid scheduled sweep windows. Another document detailed internal guidance encouraging workers not to log full legal names or places of origin when onboarding new arrivals, ostensibly to protect vulnerable populations. Karoline didn't yell. She didn't need to. She simply looked up and said, This isn't immigration support. This is obstruction. Within an hour, the clip of her remarks had reached Twitter's trending page. Hashtags like WAR, border leaks, and Leave It files dominated political TikTok. Even some centrist outlets couldn't ignore the firestorm. Meanwhile, the governor's office of California responded within 2 hours. Gavin Newsom's deputy communications director called the documents selective contextless and part of a larger misinformation campaign designed to intimidate immigrant communities. But Karoline had anticipated the pushback. At a follow-up press briefing the next morning, she came armed not with talking points, but with a former federal ICE field agent, a retired woman named Cynthia Morales. I was stationed along the California border for 12 years, Morales said. What you're seeing in these memos is something many of us have long suspected. Local coordination to evade federal law systematically. Her voice was steady. Her badge still gleamed on her lapel, even if it was no longer active. The room was silent. Still not everyone was convinced. The San Francisco Chronicle published an op-ed titled, Are We Criminalizing Compassion? The writer argued that states like California had stepped up to fill humanitarian gaps left by federal dysfunction, and that Karoline's exposure reeked of political theater. But public sentiment was shifting. On Fox News, a chyron flashed, Leavitt uncovers shelter shuffle. Are states helping criminals hide on MSNBC? The same story was framed as Leavitt sparks fear. Is ICE being used as a political weapon again? For Karoline, the media storm wasn't the point. The point, she said on her podcast the next night, isn't about left or right. It's about accountability. If these emails were about concealed weapons instead of concealed identities, we'd be having a very different conversation. Behind the scenes, Capitol Hill took notice. Within 72 hours, 3 senators requested internal reviews of immigration-related NGO contracts in their own states. DHS issued a non-committal statement. We take all whistleblower reports seriously. That statement was immediately dissected, word for word, on cable news. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom was at a clean energy conference in Sacramento when a reporter shouted the question that no one had asked him publicly yet. "Governor, do you support local shelters hiding migrants from ICE?" His smile tightened. "I support protecting human dignity and upholding California law," he said, not fueling fear with unverified accusations. But as Karoline uploaded PDF scans of each document to a public website complete with redacted names and metadata timestamps, the public began reading for themselves. A retired teacher in Nevada commented, "I don't agree with everything Karoline says. But this looks real." A union worker in Texas reposted one memo with the caption, "I've been called a racist for questioning border policy. Now I just feel lied to." For the first time in weeks, the immigration debate had a new face and a new battleground. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a viral video. It was a printed memo. A week later, at a town hall in Phoenix, an elderly man stood up and asked Karoline a simple question. If all this is true, why hasn't anyone done anything about it until now? Karoline paused. She didn't give him a campaign slogan. She said, "Because it's messy. Because no one wants to be the person who pulls the curtain back on something labeled humanitarian. But if that label is covering up something broken, someone has to." Applause erupted. Cameras clicked. And just like that, the first fault line was visible. The border debate wasn't just about fences and policies anymore. It was about trust. And Karoline had just forced the country to ask who'd been guarding it. The press wasn't done, not even close. Karoline's document leak had cracked open the sanctuary state debate. But what followed wasn't just a wave of outrage, it was a war of numbers. At a newscast the following Monday, Karoline faced off with a local anchor in Dallas. The anchor smiled professionally and asked, "You've presented some powerful emails, Congresswoman. But let's talk stats. Can you prove this is a widespread policy, not isolated cases?" Karoline didn't flinch. She reached into her binder and pulled out a chart labeled Criminal Release Rates by State, 2022 to 2024. Her voice stayed steady. In California, 67% of undocumented individuals arrested for violent crimes and drug trafficking were released without ICE notification. In states without sanctuary protections, that number is under 15%. The host blinked. Karoline continued. Thousands of those releases occurred within 10 miles of schools, hospitals, and senior living centers. That phrase, senior living centers, would make it into a dozen headlines within 12 hours. But the numbers ignited something else to scrutiny. Within hours, Gavin Newsom's press secretary released a statement accusing Karoline of statistical manipulation. According to the governor's team, Karoline was bundling all criminal activity into the same category, from violent felonies to expired license plates. Newsom himself appeared on NBC's Meet the Nation, flanked by 2 immigration advocates. Calm and measured, he addressed the camera. "Let me be clear, no one supports protecting violent offenders. But the vast majority of these so-called releases involve minor infractions, parking violations, unpaid fees, misdemeanor trespassing. We're not talking about cartel operatives. We're talking about gardeners, dishwashers, nannies." It was a strong visual, emotional, familiar, but Karoline had anticipated this. In a new video uploaded to her channel, this one filmed in a modest living room in Bakersfield, Karoline sat beside Catherine Ortiz, a 56-year-old woman whose husband Armando had been struck by a hit-and-run driver just outside their church. The suspect had been arrested in a nearby county just 2 months prior for DUI and possession of a controlled substance. ICE wasn't notified. He was released after 18 hours. Karoline didn't narrate. She just let Catherine talk. He was walking me to the car, just walking me like he always did, and then boom. I heard the engine before I saw anything. I screamed, but it was too late. I haven't been the same since. That video got 9.7 million views in 48 hours. A trending comment read, "Why does California protect someone who did that more than the woman who lost her husband?" But not everyone was moved. The Los Angeles Times ran a counter-opinion, "We can't build policy on pain alone." The editorial warned against using anecdotal tragedy to justify mass deportations. It wrote data without nuance becomes propaganda, and personal pain, while heartbreaking, doesn't tell the whole story. California's sanctuary policy is about trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement, not about shielding criminals. The piece gained traction, especially among suburban voters who sympathized with immigrant families. Even moderate Republicans began asking, is Karoline simplifying a deeply complex problem? She responded not with another video, but with a floor speech in the House of Representatives. "Let's stop pretending this is about garden-variety immigration," she said. "This is about structure, systems, shielding known criminals. You can call it compassionate. I call it dangerous." As she spoke, she held up a printed ICE database showing over 12,000 detainers ignored by California local law enforcement in a single year. But Gavin wasn't silent either. He launched a California-wide tour focused on community healing and immigration success stories. In San Jose, he sat beside a dreamer-turned-paramedic. In Sacramento, he introduced a middle school teacher who had crossed the border at age 7 and now helped run a literacy program. In each location, he asked variations of the same question. Do we want to be a country that throws away its future over fear? Or do we want to be a country that builds from it? His message was emotional, idealistic, and it worked. His poll numbers among young voters in California rose 6 points. But across Middle America, Karoline's data-centric message resonated louder, especially after one key moment. At a town hall in Ohio, a retired police officer in his 60s raised his hand. "You keep showing us numbers, Congresswoman. But what about the officers in those cities? Do they feel safe working with these local governments?" Karoline nodded. She paused, then handed the mic to a man standing in the back. His name was Sergeant Mike Daly, a 22-year veteran of the LAPD. He'd retired early and quietly moved to Arizona. No press, no drama. Now, for the first time, he spoke publicly. "We used to share everything with federal agents, intel tips, patrol updates. That changed in 2019. Suddenly it was, no ICE on school grounds, no detainer alerts, and don't mention citizenship unless it's life or death. I didn't quit because I hated immigrants. I quit because I was told not to do my job." The town hall went silent. Karoline closed the session with a question, not a statement. If law enforcement is afraid to enforce the law, what happens next? The video was clipped, captioned, and re-uploaded to dozens of YouTube channels. She's asking the questions no one else dares. Finally, someone's speaking for officers. Where's the outrage from the White House? The debate was no longer about who was right. It was about who was willing to dig deeper. As the week ended, a Rasmussen poll showed a striking shift. 64% of respondents over age 50 now said they believe local governments should be required to cooperate with federal immigration law. 59% said they'd support legislation to penalize sanctuary cities if they obstruct federal warrants. But the next phase would bring even more tension, because now Gavin Newsom was no longer just responding, he was preparing to challenge Karoline publicly. The stage was being set for something neither side could fully control, a debate that would reach the entire country. It was billed as a conversation on immigration. But by the time the broadcast aired, it had already become something else entirely. A national showdown. 2 chairs, 1 moderator. A studio in Washington, D.C., lit with cold blue and white spotlights. Gavin Newsom sat with the practiced ease of a seasoned executive, legs, cross-tailored suit pristine. Karoline Leavitt, younger by decades, leaned slightly forward in her seat, hands steady, eyes sharp. The moderator welcomed viewers. Tonight we bring together 2 voices shaping the national conversation on immigration: California Governor Gavin Newsom and Congresswoman Karoline Leavitt. We ask for respectful dialogue. Gavin interrupted with a warm smile. Always. Karoline didn't smile. The first question went straight to the core. Do sanctuary policies endanger Americans? Gavin spoke first. California's policies reflect our values. We don't believe fear builds stronger communities. Sanctuary doesn't mean lawlessness, it means local jurisdictions focusing on their priorities, not federal mandates. Karoline waited, then spoke clearly. What it means is criminals are walking free because elected officials decided they don't trust federal law enforcement. That's not compassion. That's negligence. Applause, gasps, tension. Gavin chuckled softly. Congresswoman, with all due respect. No, Governor, with all due respect, Karoline cut in. You're using emotional language to cover a legal issue. When a city tells police not to notify ICE after arresting someone for fentanyl possession, that's not progressive. That's reckless. The moderator raised a hand. Let's move to data. Karoline opened a binder. In 2023, Los Angeles County ignored 2,700 ICE detainers. Of those, over 800 involved violent charges, including assault with a deadly weapon, armed robbery, and sexual battery. This is public data. Gavin raised an eyebrow. That's not the full context. Karoline said context doesn't change the facts. Gavin countered, actually it does. Those numbers include arrests, not convictions. Many of those people were never prosecuted because the cases were dropped or the evidence was insufficient. We don't jail people based on suspicion. Karoline shot back, you don't jail them, but you release them knowing federal agents are requesting custody. Gavin replied, because in our state, we don't treat human beings like numbers. We protect due process. The moderator turned to the camera. Let's pause and hear from citizens impacted by these policies. The screen cut to pre-recorded interviews. First Officer Ray Mendoza, LAPD, retired. I was told not to report ICE warrants. I followed orders. 6 months later, the guy we let walk ended up stabbing his ex-girlfriend. I still think about it. Then Maria Reyes, community organizer, San Diego. Without sanctuary protections, our community would live in constant fear. I've seen families disappear overnight because someone called ICE over a parking violation. Karoline leaned forward again. Maria's story is powerful. But let me ask, why should immigration status shield someone from consequences after they commit a serious crime? If we're talking about law-abiding people, fine. But the people I'm talking about, some of them are repeat violent offenders. Why should any family have to bury a loved one because of politics? Gavin responded calmly. And what about the family that's torn apart because a father gets deported over a 15-year-old DUI? We're not protecting criminals. We're protecting children from becoming orphans. Karoline's voice sharpened. So the line is a DUI. What's next? Drug trafficking. Child endangerment. Where do we draw the line? Governor. Gavin looked directly at her. Where compassion ends and fear begins. That's the real question. The moderator turned to a moment that would become the clip heard around the world. Governor Newsom, in 2022, you said, quote, ICE doesn't belong in our neighborhoods. Do you still stand by that statement? Newsom paused, a blink, a breath. I do, he replied. Karoline didn't wait. She pulled out a photograph, a picture of Sergeant Joseph Ibarra, who was shot by a cartel-linked gang member in San Bernardino. This man, she said, was killed during a raid on a drug house. The suspect had been arrested twice before ICE had requested detainers, both times. They were ignored. She turned to Newsom. And you still believe ICE doesn't belong? The air in the studio went still. Newsom's face didn't move. That's a tragedy, but I won't scapegoat an entire population because of one criminal. That's what leads to racial profiling. We've seen it before. Karoline answered, Then let's be clear. You're not just rejecting ICE. You're rejecting accountability. That 90-second clip was replayed more than 25 million times in 48 hours. Even networks that avoided immigration coverage aired it under banners like Leavitt slams, Newsom over officer's death, governor, cornered in ICE debate. Was that the moment the narrative shifted? Gavin's allies rushed to defend him. Senator Padilla tweeted, Governor Newsom showed grace and leadership tonight. Don't let edited sound bites rewrite the truth. But Karoline's supporters weren't backing down. Fox News aired the full debate unedited in prime time. Conservative radio lit up with calls from Arizona, Ohio, and even Pennsylvania. The theme, finally, someone is saying what we're all thinking. Even on left-leaning forums, some cracks appeared. A viral Reddit post read, "I lean blue, but I can't deny Karoline made some strong points. We need real answers, not slogans." The following morning, Newsom held a press conference in Sacramento. He thanked viewers for engaging in a tough, essential conversation, but dismissed Karoline's approach as emotional bait. Meanwhile, Karoline was in El Paso, speaking with overwhelmed Border Patrol agents. She didn't mention the debate, but she didn't have to. The internet had already decided something seismic had happened. Late-night hosts mocked the intensity. Talk show panels dissected it frame by frame. Facebook groups flooded with captions like "She brought stats," "He brought spin," "Karoline speaks," "Gavin dodges." Not everyone was clapping. Immigration nonprofits reported a spike in online harassment. One aid worker tweeted, "After that debate, our offices were flooded with hate mail. Thanks, Congresswoman." Karoline responded via statement, "I denounce any form of hate speech, but exposing broken systems is not incitement, it's public service." In the weeks that followed, a pattern emerged. Among voters aged 40-70, support for increased federal enforcement rose sharply, especially in swing states. An Iowa grandmother wrote to her local paper, "I never heard of Karoline Leavitt before this debate. Now I'm watching every word, because for once someone's not sugarcoating what's happening to our towns." A veteran from Georgia said in a radio interview, "Newsom's too polished." Karoline reminded me of what it means to speak plain truth. But supporters of Gavin weren't silent. One retired teacher from Oregon wrote, "It's easy to wave statistics. It's harder to protect vulnerable people from being scapegoated. I may disagree with Newsom on some things, but I know his heart." Karoline ended the week with a short, calm video. "We all want safety, we all want compassion, but when compassion becomes policy without consequence, we lose both." She didn't raise her voice, she didn't attack her opponent. She let the silence at the end speak for itself. The border debate wasn't over, but the country had finally stopped scrolling long enough to listen. The week after the debate, the headlines shifted from talking points to action. Karoline Leavitt was no longer just reacting to policy, she was becoming part of it. In a surprise joint press conference with Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Karoline voiced support for a newly announced program, the Community Realignment Initiative. The plan aimed to bus recently released undocumented immigrants from overcapacity border towns to sanctuary cities, including San Francisco and Los Angeles. The move sparked immediate national controversy. Governor Newsom denounced it within hours. "This isn't policy. This is political theater using vulnerable people as pawns to score national headlines," he told reporters in Sacramento. "It's a disgrace." Karoline replied with calm defiance on a local Fox affiliate, "I support any state that refuses to collapse under federal inaction. If sanctuary cities say they're safe havens, then they should welcome those seeking shelter. We're not dumping people, we're honoring their policies." News crews filmed the first bus arrivals in downtown Los Angeles. A local nonprofit tried to assist, but tensions flared when city council members claimed they'd had no notice. One migrant family interviewed by ABC said they were confused and scared. Their young son clung to a blanket, unsure of where they were. The image went viral and the narrative tilted dangerously. Critics accused Karoline and Abbott of cruelty. The hashtag #NotCargo trended nationwide. But just as backlash mounted, another video emerged. In the clip, Karoline was seen stepping off a Greyhound bus, not in D.C., but in Yuma, Arizona. No press, no microphone. She approached a small group of overwhelmed Border Patrol agents under a blazing sun, handing them cases of bottled water. She stayed for 2 hours, listening, not speaking. A Texas officer later told CNN off-camera, "She's the only federal official I've seen out here who didn't come for a photo op." The video, posted by a retired officer's daughter, garnered millions of views in a day. Caption, "She came alone. No cameras, just boots on the ground." That single clip shifted public sentiment. A morning consult poll showed 56% of respondents aged 50 and older supported temporary migrant redirection programs until federal policy is reformed. Among independents, the number was 61%. The following night, Newsom appeared on MSNBC. He was polished, composed, and deeply frustrated. "We are not your staging ground. These are real lives, not tokens in some federalist game." He paused, looked into the camera. "And if Karoline Leavitt wants to talk compassion, then let's see her house families, not hand out water bottles for clicks." Karoline once again didn't respond directly, but her team posted a quiet clip from a town hall in Ohio. A grandmother stood up, voice shaking. "My town changed in one summer. I don't hate immigrants, ma'am. I just want to feel safe walking to the pharmacy again." Karoline didn't interrupt. She didn't pivot. She nodded, then said, "You're allowed to want order without being called cruel. You're allowed to love your country and still love people." It wasn't a soundbite. It was a message, and one that resonated far beyond her base. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom launched a legislative proposal to increase federal reimbursement for migrant aid programs. His plan would offer additional support to cities receiving relocated individuals, but Republican lawmakers rejected it outright. Karoline issued a statement calling the bill federal bailout money for a broken ideology, but not all of her critics were quiet. A group of veterans released a joint op-ed in the LA Times, accusing Karoline of escalating tension without offering national solutions. The piece ended, "America doesn't need megaphones. It needs mechanics." Still, the momentum stayed with her. A Sunday morning segment on CBS featured a clip of an Iowa voter saying, "I don't agree with everything she says, but I believe her." And that's new. Gavin Newsom, on the other hand, seemed more isolated. Though he maintained support in coastal states, a growing number of moderate voters began echoing one line: "He talks, but she shows up." As Congress reconvened, the media frenzy began to cool, but the deeper question remained: what does leadership look like in the chaos of a broken border system? And in the middle of it all, one thing was clear: Karoline Leavitt was no longer just the voice of opposition. She was becoming the voice of something else, uncertain, rising, and very hard to ignore. Weeks after the viral debate, after the border visits and political firestorms, the noise began to fade. Karoline Leavitt returned home to New Hampshire. No cameras, no staff, just her grandmother's porch and a quiet breeze. Her grandmother handed her a local newspaper clipping, a small op-ed about a man named Luis, a longtime lawn worker who had been quietly deported. "He was my neighbor, not a number," the article read. Karoline folded the paper slowly. "I don't want to be the reason someone like Luis disappears," she said. Her grandmother replied gently, "You're not. But you're the reason people started paying attention again." That evening, in a small town hall with no national media present, Karoline stood before a modest group of voters. There were no speeches, no slogans, just stories. Some were angry, some emotional, others confused. Karoline listened, then spoke quietly. "I believe in strong borders. I believe in law. But I also believe we can care about people while protecting our country. It's not either or." No applause, just understanding. The next day, a clip of the town hall surfaced online. It didn't go viral, but it was shared by veterans, nurses, and teachers. People who felt finally that someone was speaking in plain terms, not to impress, but to connect.